Thank you so much, and thank you for coming for this roundtable. As I have already told several times, it's important that we share experiences, and as far as I have seen during the sessions, we really shared thoughts, experiences, questions in the sessions, and that's I thought that it's very important to organize this roundtable where we can share ideas from different points of views. So I invited some people from the participants and some other people from the organizations, and I wanted to have a kind of a complex composition of roundtable. So let me introduce the members. And I will go from there. You know Jerry Smith, I don't have to introduce her. She's our keynote, and I think that it's very important that our keynotes participate in this event, in this roundtable. And then Judit Takács, she's a Hungarian sociologist, and her main field is gender and sexuality studies, especially LGBT studies, and he is internationally and nationally very well known for her work, and we work together too. So thank you, Judith, that you accepted my invitation. Esther Salamon, she's the president of the EPA, the European Parent Association, and she in this way represents the view of the parents and that organization, and that organization is kind of part of our conference too. So thank you for coming. Peter McLaren, you know him. Gábor Halász, he's a professor at our university here, at our faculty, and he's an educationalist, a well-known researcher, especially of high school pedagogy, higher education, and pedagogy in higher education, and in general he does research about school systems, and he is even a research fellow at the Hungarian Institute for Research and Development. So I think his view is very important as a researcher. Thank you for coming. András Pósa, he's a high school student. Some of you have visited yesterday the Green Rooster, the Zöld Kakas Líceum yesterday, and he's one of the students there, and he will represent somehow the view of a student. And Dóra Soponyai, he's his teacher in the school, so he represents the view of the everyday practitioner in a school that is engaged in students who are kind of kicked out, dropped out from other schools, and who has really special characteristics, special richness that they have. I think that is the specificity of that school, that you value that special richness of the students. So thank you. And Julio Diniz Pereira from Brazil, and he's a teacher educator, and his special field is social justice and teacher education. And as you might have seen, there is a new program, a new event in the program. After the closing of the conference, any of you who are interested, we will go to Goya Pub, and there will be a book presentation, and this book is of Julio, and it's about the landless workers movement and in Brazil, and how education and teacher education is present there. So I think that perspective from Brazil, another continent is again and from this very specific context, I think it would be very interesting for us today. So thank you. First of all, I will have two main questions for the participants, and then after the discussion, after two kind of rounds, we will open the floor and you can comment, you can have your questions and your opinion too, so it's not a closed circle. So I have seen during the conference that in the sessions, during the keynotes, that we notice that there are a lot of problems in the world related to social justice, and education is influenced and is encapsulated in these situations. We often, at least in the discussion I participated, we often saw that how structure and system is kind of encapsulate, kind of influence education and inculcate the values, the norms in education, and how this system is often not just, and the structures are really oppressing. So this is kind of the situation that we see. We have seen the situation that diversity is maybe not well accepted in schools, in education, but of course, again, this is something that is happening in society too, in different contexts, and we found out that we have different contexts, but that is a common experience that we are not satisfied with our societies. Of course, we are here because of that. We would like to do something. So the other thing, the other dimension was that we, as teacher educators, we were thinking about change, because education is about change somehow, in a way. And because of that, of course, we all have visions about change, how the world, how societies may be better places for our students, but in general, better places for everyone. How they can be more diverse and just societies. So my first question for our participants in the round table is what kind of vision do you have about society and the change is in society? So what changes you think we need, and how they could develop, how they could happen, these changes? So vision of social justice, vision of democracy, diversity, and how we can arrive to that vision, and what is the nature of this change? So change and how does it work, more or less? I think we have different points from different standpoints to different theories, different practical experiences, and that is enriching. And I would like to ask who is the first who wants to start. I don't, and then of course everyone can contribute. Julius is from there. No, I would like someone who volunteer. You don't mind? Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that we're talking about what our approach is, right? Okay, so I'll focus on that. I think we need to develop what's called a philosophy of praxis, right? And it's an introduction into everyday life. It's the way we live our lives daily, not just in classrooms, not just in schools, but in community centers, in churches, in base communities, among our comrades, in libraries, in the public sphere. By philosophy of praxis, I mean this. and I have to preface it by saying that my vision was, obviously, my mentor was Paulo Freire, right? But his work has become very domesticated in the US, and I would call it a critical pedagogy of empty forms. You know, if you sit in a circle and have a conversation, not a dialogue, but a conversation, somehow you're a Freirean educator. Well, and you're always a social justice educator, because if you're not, then what? Are you for social injustice? So nobody's going to say they're not for social justice. So it really is an empty term in many ways. But well, as a young woman, Raya Donaevskaya escaped Stalinism. She was from the Ukraine. She went to Mexico and became the translator for Leon Trotsky, just prior to Trotsky's assassination. And we know that Trotsky was assassinated by a Stalinist agent with an ice pick, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Raya idolized Trotsky, but very quickly she began to take on her mentor and challenge her mentor. Now, she was there with Trotsky, Diego Rivera, the artist, right? Frida Kahlo, etc. She disagreed with Trotsky on the Hitler-Stalin Pact and whether or not the Soviet Union was a degenerated workers' state or not. She came up with the theory that the Soviet Union was a form of state capitalism, not communist, but it was state capitalism, and I think that's important. So she left Mexico just prior to Trotsky's assassination, went to the United States, started to teach Hegel and Marx in factories throughout the United States, and she began the movement called well, it's now known as the U.S. Marxist humanist movements. And she developed what she called a theory of absolute negativity, right, using Hegel and Marx. And let me give you an example, because I think one of the things we need to do is develop critical consciousness and the new. And so she began to develop this notion, along with Hegel, of the negation of the negation, right? It's not enough to simply negate something, because if you simply negate something, you're still dependent on the object that you negate. So you have to negate that which you negate. And then you can enter the realm of something new. Let me give you one example. Young people today are saying, I am not capital, right? Because every young person has the right, to say and to ask the question, what has society made of me that I no longer want to be? Right? Every young person has the right to ask that question. What has society made of me that I no longer want to be? And of course, one of the answers is, and we're hearing that more and more around the world with young people in social movements, I am not capital. So the emphasis is on the not. But when you begin to reflect on the positive message within that negation, you change the emphasis. I am not capital. That's the second negation. The first is I am not capital. You become self-reflective, and you find the positivity in the negative, and you then discover your own agency, and it becomes I am not capital, right? The emphasis isn't on your own agency, the fact that you're a subject of history and not simply an object of history. So that would be one thing that I would talk about. I would emphasize is the development of critical consciousness through self-referential negation and developing a philosophy of praxis. Obviously, in teacher education programs that I know in the United States, people are talking about, of course, Gramsci, and every student is an organic intellectual. Every teacher is an organic intellectual. But I did a piece with Gustavo Fishman from Argentina, originally from Buenos Aires, and on the committed intellectual, right? We have to name what we're committed about. We need to name that. And so it's interesting that 2 books were published by Paulo Freire, right, this year. One was called A Pedagogy of Commitment, right? And I think that's important. So we need to name the fact that we have a preferential option for the dispossessed, the poor, the immiserated. And you were saying, well, how do we decide who's oppressed and who isn't? I remember someone asked Paulo Freire that at a conference in the US. And I think the person stood up and said something like, well, am I oppressed, Professor Freire? My family made $750,000 last year, but we've had some hard times now. We're down to $500,000 a year or something. Does that mean I'm oppressed? And Freire sat back and said, well, the oppressed, they know who they are. They don't have to ask that question. Am I oppressed, Professor Freire? You know, they don't need to ask that. So we need to name that. So we need to develop, we need to emphasize becoming committed intellectuals around a philosophy of praxis. The big, fashionable, and I think it's important form of methodological approach in teacher education now is chat. I don't know, is chat really popular here? Cultural, historical, activity theory? Is that big? It's huge in the States. It's kind of a Vygotskian approach, but it's really big, cultural, historical. And but I thought it might be very popular here. I would just like to say that we need to begin to think about good old historical materialist analysis. Right? And we need to focus more on the issue of transcendence and not be stymied by Foucault's theories of power, which are, while brilliant, don't help us much in making the kinds of necessary changes that we need to make. That's it.
Thank you so much for this theoretical insight. And anyone else who would like to contribute to the question? Judith.
I tend to disagree with you actually concerning Foucault, because I think it can help us, I mean, reading Foucault, to raise our awareness about power and how it works. So perhaps on the other hand, I agree with you that empirically Foucault doesn't really help us, you know, how to do this work, but anyway, it's quite inspiring, or it can be. So, but also, I mean, concerning, I think Yuri actually posed a lot of questions, and I'm not sure whether I'm in the position to answer any of these, but at least I can reflect on some of the points you raised. And well, first of all, you were referring to social change, and I think that it was meant in a kind of positive context, yeah, that social change is something which takes us further, or, you know, takes us to a better place or whatever. But unfortunately, we know, at least, well, I'm a sociologist, so I'm coming from a pretty empirical background, that social change doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, it's a linear line towards a wonderful state of affairs, as we can see it in Hungary now, for example. Also about social justice, I think it's all about defining what you mean by social justice. It was, you know, perhaps you're aware of the fact that just a week, 2 weeks ago, we had national elections in Hungary. And it was, though we didn't really have a very refined campaign from certain sides of the political, palette, we could see that the definition of social justice can very much differ according to, for example, social democrats and the so-called conservative nationalists and the neo-Nazis, for example. So we have to be, I'm afraid, quite careful when we talk about social justice, because perhaps here in this room we tend to agree about social, the definition of social justice, and we take it for granted, but it's perhaps because we don't mix very much with those on the other side of the, or other sides of the, social and political maps of our societies. And also, while I was listening to our colleague, the first speaker, I was thinking about Max Weber, who, well, of course, probably some of you are familiar with his work, that whether we can do any kind of value-free work, not just social scientific work, but I guess your work, I mean educational science, or just when you teach, well, in a classroom, and it can be in primary school or in university, we all bring, I guess, with us our values. The question is whether, you know, we should share these values, or, you know, we should, well, probably contemplate about this, how to handle our own values and how to try to, well, introduce in the hidden curriculum, perhaps, these normative expectations which we have towards, mainly towards ourselves. So, well, I'm afraid I'm not very helpful to answer your questions. I can just raise some points, but I think these are very important issues you raised, but I'm afraid we won't have the the answers here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. That's my goal, to raise questions, reflection.
2 years ago in Pakistan, a 15-year-old girl called Malala Yousafzai was on the bus home from school when the bus was stopped and was boarded by Taliban gunmen saying, "Who is Malala?" and shot her in the head. And some of you may have heard of Malala Yousafzai. At that time, as I said, she was a 15-year-old schoolgirl who had been campaigning alongside her father for the right to education for all girls in Pakistan. And for that very reason, the Taliban shot her in the head. She was eventually taken to Britain for brain surgery, from which, and she has recovered. And last July, on her 16th birthday, she spoke at the United Nations, where she was introduced by Ban Ki-moon. She spoke at the United Nations about education for all. At the conference, at the United Nations conference, one of the things that happened was that everybody in the audience took up her stance and stood up and said, "I am Malala," responding to the question of the Taliban, "Who is Malala?" Subsequently, she has become a figure for education for all, and particularly for education for girls, and she's a young person that's done that. In Glasgow a number of years ago, in Glasgow in Scotland, where I come from, we're a city that receives quite a significant number of asylum seekers, and the asylum seekers in Glasgow are subject to the UK Border Agency decision as to whether they will have the right to remain. As such, asylum seeker pupils in schools are frequently removed with their families in dawn raids by the UK Border Agency. They disappear from classrooms, they disappear from schools, and teachers don't know what's happened to them. And in Glasgow a number of years ago, a group of 14 to 16-year-old pupils took up a campaign to fight against the UK government and to demand that child asylum seekers were not detained in detention centres and were not removed in dawn raids. And those 14 to 16-year-olds became known as the Glasgow Girls. And the Glasgow Girls won political awards for their political activism. These are just two global examples of young people taking action for social justice and young people taking action for education. And those young people were taking action in a world which, as we all know, social justice is not easy to attain, and there are many enemies to social justice. Some of those young people were supported by their teachers, but teacher education today, I think, doesn't enable teachers to be critical activist professionals. And I'm speaking as a teacher educator, so I think for me the main focus is, and I think this would be agreeing with what Peter was saying earlier, making critical active professionals of our teachers who can work alongside our pupils to gain the goals of education for all. And I think it's fairly straightforward to talk in Europe and the West about social justice. What we have to recognise is that globally many children aren't receiving any education whatsoever. So my goal, my vision for the future would be active teachers and active learners that are going to achieve that goal of education for all.
Okay, then the microphone is mine, so I think I will continue. I fully agree with what you've just said, and I want to highlight, of course, from a parental point of view, that we don't have much time. I've just been to a conference where somebody just outlined the situation in Europe, that the majority of teachers are going to retire in the next 10 years, and the next generation of teachers will come to replace them. There are two questions. Do we have 10 years? I don't think so, because the world is changing so quickly that we don't have 10 years to wait until a new generation of teachers will enter the education system. And the other question is, what kind of new teachers these people will be who just leave teacher training colleges and universities in Europe. There is a big research on the situation of teacher training that was ordered by the European Commission. The results are not out at the moment, but we know that the situation is quite similar in each and every EU country. And the situation is more or less that teacher education is very similar to the teacher education of 30 years ago when I finished this college. And I think this is a huge problem, because the young generation of teachers who are going to replace these old ones, if we can wait the next 10 years, will have the same kind of values, the same set of methods. If you, the teacher trainers, the teacher educationists, don't do something immediately. We all know that the world is changing very rapidly. And we all know that this is not a world where education is finished when you leave school. There are actually two groups of people who are not really aware of this fact, and it's teachers and parents. So what I think is, for any kind of development, we need a system where these adults who are responsible for the future, for the children, start educating each other. And of course, it is the teachers who should have the professional knowledge to offer a basis for that. Some research, mostly done by Charles Deforge and Ramon Fletcher in France and Spain, show that it's quite obvious that up to the age of 11, 12, it's the family who has the most impact on the future educational success of the child. And if you look at areas where there are many immigrant families, many families coming from lower educated backgrounds, they don't have the culture of somehow trying to make their children understand why education is important. And in these communities, the first thing you need to do is educate the parents. I just will give you one very, very small example. In this district, the 7th district of Budapest, part of the district is part where the majority of the children are Roma. It's outside of the big ring road. And about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, there was a new program introduced by the local municipality that meals were free in kindergarten. of course, kindergarten is not compulsory. In Hungary, compulsory means that the parents are punished if the child doesn't show up at school. So there is a game of getting medical evidence that was a justified leave. But kindergarten is not compulsory, or wasn't compulsory at that time. And because of the free meals, all the Roma children were enrolled, and they actually attended kindergarten. It was finished 8 years ago or 9 years ago. It was only there for 3 years. But those children who were in kindergarten, where the kindergarten teachers had time to deal with the parents, and also were trained to deal with the parents, show a much higher success rate at school. They are finishing primary school, maybe secondary school now, because it was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And there is no dropout in that social group. So I think the key point is to start dealing with the whole family as early as possible.
Okay, let me join now to these words as a practitioner point of view. I agree with you. So as a practitioner, I'm the fan of the bottom-up building, the bottom-up building. So I believe in to be educated together with the kids and to be educated with the parents together. For example, so I'm from the secondary school of Green Rooster, which is a school for dropout children, and they usually failed in many schools before they get to Green Rooster School. And the first impression usually that they get here in Green Rooster that we usually don't surprise on nearly anything. And the second surprise for them is that we nearly accept anything until it does not hurt the other person. And that is the basis we can build on with these kids. The second is that these kids have a high level of autonomy. So they are longing for our attendance, and that's the first step. The second is that they have a very high level of autonomy, and they don't accept anything that is connected to rules, to adults, or anything that they reject. So by having many conversations, by having many working together, we can influence on each other, and trying to develop together and having accept each other. And I think that that's the main point. We have to step first. And yes, we should often involve parents as well. So, for example, we have many circles. We have a special conflict management program in Zsolt Kakas. When there is a conflict, and there are injustice. There is injustice in a secondary school. Or, for example, a student feels that something has happened to him or her that is not justice, or yes, let us say it like this. And then we have circles in which we invite parents and all the persons that are influenced in that situation. And during many circles and during many situations like this, we just hope that we can influence the way of thinking in their heads, in parents and in students' heads, so some changes can be reached.
Well, my vision about social change, first of all, I think we should always say social change in the plural, because we have different changes in different contexts. And I agree with you, some of change can be positive change, and some of the change can be negative change, or regressive change, or progressive change. For example, in Brazil, we have a history of change. in order to keep everything as the same, you know? So, and Brazil is one of the most unjust countries in the world. The wealth distribution is one of the most concentrated in the world. And so we see injustice in Brazil everywhere. But maybe the change that we need in Brazil are not exactly the change that you guys need here in Hungary, not exactly the same. Maybe the change that we need now in Brazil are not exactly the change that we needed in Brazil, you know, many years ago. But at the same time that we have different changes and different necessities, depending on the specific context, we also have common principles. And this is why we are here, for example, and we can discuss about common principles. And maybe our challenge is exactly try to clarify what are the common principles that we have for trying to lead us to get connected, get involved in our struggles, in our specific contexts. And I also agree that social justice is an empty term. Neoliberals, they say that they support social change. Corporations, they say that they support social change and social justice. So it's a term that has been co-opted, you know, by neoliberals, by corporations. And so I think that we have to be more specific and, you know, and we have to be more explicit about social change and social justice.
Like to continue?
So, I understood your question as a double question, both on the vision we have and on how to get there, how to realize this vision. So me as a researcher in educational governance, policy making, policy implementation, I am naturally interested mainly in the second part. So how to get the job done. So how to achieve, how to realize, how to implement things. And one of the first thing I would stress in connection with that is the need to understand the nature of educational change. So I think that now we are facing the emergence of a new knowledge, a new science of educational change. So we know much more than, let's say, 1 decade ago about how change is created, what are the chances of changes. So I would probably promote a better understanding of educational change. Let me just mention a few elements of that. For instance, we have to understand better the drivers, to identify those drivers which are pushing changes or barriers. So the dynamics of drivers and barriers, and I shall come back to that. I shall try to identify one important driver that can promote democracy and justice in education systems. Then we have to understand better the context in which the change is happening, the real capacity of systems and institutions and people to change. We have to understand the dynamic of the macro and the macro and the micro level. So how the different levels are in an interplay. So we have to have this double perspective to look both at the system level, the macro level, and the micro level. Then we have to understand the dynamics of top-down and bottom-up processes, and to understand how they can be combined, because now we know that none of them can be exclusive. So only changes which are combining the both perspectives are successful. Then we have to understand the stakeholder dynamics. We have to see who are those key actors, agents, which have an influence on change processes and how they interact and how their interaction is changing their behavior. And we also have to understand the role of time. And this is something what I would like to stress particularly. So without understanding the nature of time and the role of time in change, we cannot really implement changes. Let me just mention that last week I was listening to the presentation of the Welsh Minister of Education about the new education reform in Wales. And one of the components of this reform, of his reform strategy, was sequencing policy. He repeated several times that we are sequencing policy, and what he meant by that was that although they have a goal, they do not start implementing this goal until a certain condition is not realized, and they wait with patience. Waiting is a very important component of their policy making. And then we also have to understand the nature of interventions, policy interventions, which aim at changing things in the system. So why some interventions are producing miraculous effects in certain places, while in other places they do not produce anything. And now let me come back to two factors, the drivers and the understanding of the context. If I try to identify the key drivers that can help the achievement of democracy and justice in contemporary education systems, probably I would point at the first place to the move toward more effectiveness. And the knowledge we have now on how effectiveness can be produced. That could sound paradoxical for certain analysts, how effectiveness is connected with democracy and justice. Well, now we know that effectiveness, and when I say effectiveness, I mean producing high-level student performance or high-level equity outcomes. Now we know that effectiveness can be produced only in systems where schools are operating as intelligent learning organizations characterized by what we call distributed leadership. So only institutions which achieve justice and democratic leadership can produce effectiveness. That means that if politicians are really committed to improve the effectiveness of education systems, they cannot avoid promoting leadership styles, organizational models, which are pushing schools towards higher level democracy and justice. So this is one thing. I just tried to identify one driver, effectiveness. And as for context, the most important thing, I think, is to build as much as possible on what is already existing, what is already working. So when we want to achieve a goal like democracy or justice, the first thing we have to do is to identify those specific cases, those specific schools, for instance, where we think the thing is working. The green rooster is one of them. This is one case. I could mention other cases in this country. We know cases which are achieving democracy and justice. And then we have three questions. How these cases were born? So what is the origin? How is it possible that they were created? The second question is how they are sustained. Why they didn't die? Because many times those initiatives die after a while. And the third, maybe the most important, is how they can be replicated, how they can be upscaled. So this is what I wanted to add.
Thank you. András, I would like really hear your thoughts or your point about any of these questions that we had.
All right. I don't have vision about social changing because I think I'm living in this changing because I came to Budapest at about 2009 and I started studying news writing and about in 2011 my life started collapsing because I have a lot of personal problems, for example drug addiction and other things. I was in the middle of my life's collapsing and I started to think what to do with myself. I have to stop this, I have to change. And a friend of mine showed the Green Rooster Lyceum, and when I went there, I saw something that I thought that this is impossible. This cannot be, because I see that the students, no, the teachers, are not going on a straight way. They all of them, I saw that they are looking around. They see children and they are interested about what of them, how are they, and anything. And when I went to that school, and after the first day, I thought that I have to stay here, because this place will change me, and I will be happy. And I'm there for 3 years now, and I'm studying camera using. No, I'm not studying. I'm doing right now this. So I will leave this school this year, and I my teachers gave me everything what I needed to change, because I stopped drugs. I stopped everything that can collapse my life, and I think we live in democracy in our class, in our school, because we are not just the ones, the students, who are learning from the teachers. The teachers are learning from us too, and this makes this school so perfect for me, for example.
Thank you so much for this personal testimony, and I think this was a very good example of how it works. I think in everyday life and in everyday practice. It's very interesting because you started to answer my second question. What teachers can do? That's my question. What teacher education can do? So you have already started to answer that question. So I would like to continue this conversation, giving the floor to you to react to each other and to continue this discourse.
Great. Thanks. This has been great discussion so far. I just want to respond to just a couple of points that were made, if I might. I think Weber's important, but very, important, Max Weber. But one of the dilemmas we have in North America, in my native Canada and my adopted country of the United States, and I understand in England as well, from my comrades Dave Hill and Glenn Rakowski and Mike Cole, that class is generally approached from a Weberian perspective as opposed to a Marxist perspective. So what you get is an emphasis on lifestyle, on consumption, and circulation of capital, as opposed to how people are objectively located in social relations of production. So you know, it's basically Weber, and that's it. You know, when we look at conflict theory and teacher education programs, I didn't want to denounce Foucault. You know, I was talking about my when I briefly studied with Foucault, so I wanted to diss my ex-mentor. But I think that in a lot of the interest in biopolitics and a lot of the, you know, Guattari and Deleuze, there's a focus on eminence as opposed to transcendence. The dialectic is rejected, and I think to the peril of those of us who seek to build a new society. But I think the question of organization was mentioned. You know, I think you mentioned, you know, vertical versus horizontal organization. That's something that's been neglected. When I go to Latin America, there seems to be a tension between two groups, the Zapatistas, right, and the Chavistas. And there's a lot of quarreling that goes on around the question of organization. How do we organize ourselves? Is it vertical or is it horizontal, or is it a mixture of both? Is it representative democracy and participative democracy and direct democracy, or one or the other? The Zapatistas, and this is a simplified description, but the Zapatistas feel that you can't assume state power, that state power is always power over and never can be power with. So when Evo Morales was elected president of Bolivia, they congratulated him as being only maybe the second or third indigenous president ever elected in Latin America, but they refused to go to the celebration of his electoral victory because he chose to take state power. The Chavistas believe that you can rebuild the state from the bottom up. But the big tension comes, I think, with two terms. One is andar predicando, which is walking. I tell you, it's kind of the old Leninist vanguard party, you know, it's the top down. We will tell you where to go because we're the experts, as opposed to the andar preguntando, which would be walking, we ask questions, we make the road by walking. And so there seems to be that tension, at least that I've discovered in some of my trips to Latin America. But yeah, I think that's, and as far as the drivers go for educational change, who are the drivers? I think the drivers, right, are the working class. I think the drivers are those who depend on wage labor to survive, and are part of the the 99%, right, as opposed to the 1% who own the means of production. I think the drivers are the working class. I don't think, you know, we need to have, we need to replicate. I don't think we need to wait for conditions to arise. I think we need to make those conditions happen, and we need to struggle, and we need to force those conditions, and not simply wait for approach this incrementally and wait for things to happen.
Yes, I would be pleased to react to this driver question, evoking two specific cases. One of them is one that I've been studying in Japan, which is a project called the OECD Tohoku School Project. If you go to my personal website, you can see the detailed analysis of this program. In this project, one of the sentences I often heard from Japanese teachers that here we are learning from our students. And this is something very special in Japan. You know, this is one of the most hierarchical societies, and in schools, even students asking questions is often seen as unacceptable. But here in this project, teachers enjoy, they really find pleasure in learning from their children. So I am asking what the driver has been that led to the creation of this thing. Well, first, of course, that was the big crisis, the catastrophe, the triple catastrophe, the tsunami, the earthquake, and the nuclear catastrophe, because the whole project is in the north of Japan, affected by this catastrophe. So that's a major driver. But I saw those who initiated that project, and they were long waiting. They were waiting for the occasion. And when the occasion came, when the opportunity arrived, they immediately grasped it. And another driver, which is very strongly linked with this special occasion, is the involvement of external stakeholders, local entrepreneurs, those who are involved in the recovery process. And this is happening in a system which is extremely closed, in which it's very difficult to find direct cooperation possibilities between the school and the external environment. So simply bringing in those who earlier were not present in the landscape changed the dynamics of the whole thing. And the second case, the second example I would mention is a school that I visited 3 weeks ago. In fact, I spent a whole week in the school, living in the school, from morning to the evening, and trying to understand how this school is operating. And in this school, which is in the northeast of Hungary, more than 60% of the pupils are from the poor Roma minorities. I was visiting their houses. I was in their house, so I saw the way their living conditions. And from this school, 100, it's a so-called basic school, 100 of pupils is going to secondary education, 100%. And 70% is going to programs that lead to the university entrance examination. So this is a miracle. So of course I wanted to try to understand the drivers. So how this miracle could be produced. And the main driver, there were several, but the main driver I identified was the teachers. The teachers who wanted to improve the effectiveness of the school and who wanted to improve the technology, the routines, the pedagogical methods they were using. They were very much focusing on lessons, on teaching. And they slowly, well, incrementally, they slowly changed this technology. That was a process which lasted about 15 years. And after a 15 years process, they could produce this result. Democracy and justice were something in this school that you can really touch. It was there, as shown by the results. So I think that there are many different drivers that we can use together.
Thank
Thank you.
Let me add one more driver. You will not be surprised. I will add parents. I was at a meeting where Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, and Barroso, the President of the Commission, were present. And I asked a question about what they offer that can be communicated to parents. And in his answer, Martin Schulz said that he has his personal example showing that a parent would do anything for his or her child or children. In Europe, of course, we have a long-standing culture of working for the future of your children. And I think the main point where we need the help of the teachers, and of course the teacher trainers who are changing the attitudes of the would-be teachers and the in-service teachers, is to show parents what really is the best for their children. And it can only be done in a democratic way. If the school is hierarchic, if it's closed, you cannot teach democracy there. We were visiting a school in Ireland last year, and the headmaster of the school told us that when he went into that school, there were 2 fences around the school, and parents were not allowed to cross the first one, the outer fence, just when they were summoned by the school. And he decided to get rid of both fences. It's in a very poor area with lots of unemployed parents. And you know, the Irish people love music. So he built a parents' room in the middle of the school so that they had to cross the whole building to get there. And parents were encouraged to go there. It was, they bought a lot of musical instruments, and the parents were invited to come anytime to play these musical instruments. And the teachers were trained to spend their free time to eventually go to that room and start talking to the parents. And he started this program some 10 years ago, and he can see the change because they have a different, the children have a different view of the whole importance of schooling because they get something different from their own parents. And I want to highlight just one more thing. And I don't know how often you meet this notion, but I see that most of the teachers who are parents at the same time seem to be a split personality. So if you meet them in an environment when they are parents, they act like normal parents. If you meet them in an environment where they are the teacher, they are as if they were completely different. But I'm positive that it can be changed, and I also have a good example. My son's former classmate had a mother who is the chemistry teacher in the secondary school where he now goes, and she is his chemistry teacher. And she was this split personality. She was enforcing her subject as the most important thing in the world. And she has changed. She understood that in a secondary school which is focusing on arts and humanities, she's not going to be the most important teacher, and she could accept it. And now she can communicate in a much more equal basis with the students because she doesn't feel kind of extra because she knows something that nobody is interested in. So I'm positive that there can be a change, but we can only do it together with the children, with the parents, and with the teachers. It's very, very important to listen to the children from the very early stages of their lives. The best one to choose a teacher in primary school is not your neighbor. It's not the fellow teacher, not somebody you know, but it's your child. And if you let your child to choose, if you have the option, at the age of 6, it will be a success. And if you start giving the options, giving the opportunities to make decisions and to discuss why that decision is good or bad, you can raise children that will be democratic. If you raise them in a hierarchical system, it will not work.
Yeah, I'm sorry to add something not so optimistic, but when I was listening to you, and I'm really amazed by, for example, these northeast Hungarian developments, which I don't know whether you are aware of the fact that this is really a very huge achievement, especially if you consider the average admission rate of Roma children not in the otherwise quite challenged region of northeast Hungary. But anyway, while I was listening to our colleagues from Hungary, I had this idea that, I had this feeling that we are talking about committed teachers and committed parents. And unfortunately, when we have a look at the empirical findings, we will see something different. Like, first of all, parents. I mean, that's already a great achievement if you have, both parents around, and if they are committed to your educational development, if it means anything to them. Also, for example, when we are talking about dropouts, there are two typical groups, and one of them is those who have coming from this very low socioeconomic environments, and there are the other ones who are coming from very high, or these exceptional. Exceptionally well-to-do parents, for example, they have sometimes children who would be characterized like that. Also, concerning committed teachers, I mean, this is wonderful that we all assume that teachers want to contribute to the development of children or students, but if you have a look at these, for example, empirical research about Hungarian students who in the teachers training profession, how awfully prejudiced they are, and also their political orientation is a bit frightening, if I may say so. This is only the Hungarian case, but I'm afraid that I am not aware of the other, for example, in neighboring countries, teachers training, the participants of teachers training institutions, how their value orientation and their prejudice levels are, but I'm afraid this is not just a Hungarian special feature. So I don't know, of course, I mean, this, I have to agree with Judy when he introduced, Hungarian is a gender neutral language, so we constantly mix up she and he, so, but I like this gender blending, but I just wanted to tell you that we are not totally confused, it's just our language is very PC, I guess. The only thing in Hungary, one of the few things in Hungary, yes, okay. So so I just wanted to just just make these short notes as a kind of warning sign that it's all wonderful, and I really I have high respect for like the initiatives, working initiatives like the Green Rooster. And these, like the Helyű Keresztúr, these initiatives, and in other places in Hungary and in other places of the world. But I also have to, draw our attention to these general features, which are not really very, positive, if I may say so.
There were several things have run through my head as the previous contributors have been talking. One of them, I think, is about I'm concerned to hear what you're saying about Hungarian teacher students, but I don't think it's only in Hungary, unfortunately. But I do think that if we reflect on why the bulk of teachers want to come into teaching, why the bulk of social workers want to go into social work, community education, and the other professions related to pedagogy and education, the bulk of the participants globally do want to change, do want to make changes for the better, and I am optimistic about that. But I think in order for the practice to turn into reality, then the education of those professionals has to remain in the universities, because if it goes into schools, it can become an apprenticeship model, it can become teaching to the test, it can become teaching to the given curriculum and not exposing the realities and differences that there are available to people for practice and professional autonomy. You were referring to the realities of the results of empirical research, and I think one of the issues that concerns me is that the empirical research that gets funding and that gets high media visibility is the empirical research that tells bad news stories. And so I think there is a real need for research itself to be turned around. I do have some concerns that a number of the papers I was hearing at the conference were coming up with negativity towards teachers. And I think we have to be very, very cautious that our own research isn't just feeding into what the media would like to say about what is happening in schools, what is happening to those who are underachieving, who are not achieving, who are dropping out. And we have to turn the focus of our own research into the good news stories. So onto the story that, I'm sorry, is it Angie? Angie was telling us, is it Ondrash, onto the stories such as Ondrash was telling us, onto the ways in which those who are being failed by the system are finding allies in the system that will help them to turn around their failures and help them to turn around their expectations. So all of us in this room have got a responsibility to turn around what it is that reaches the news. I think I had lots of other things that went through my head, but I've forgotten them at the moment, and I'll hand on to somebody else.
I think actually, just for, I think it's a very good idea. As researchers, we should keep this in mind, that we should focus on the good news, but, well, we will try, I think.
I would like to the comment on teacher commitment as a driver, and my question is how far commitment is important, or are there other similar drivers that can push teachers to go in the way of that school that you named? Well, when I was doing an interview with one of the students in the school, and I asked him, what is the difference between this school and other schools? Because that was one student who spent some time in other schools. And the answer was, in this school, teachers are not afraid of pupils. In this school, teachers are not afraid of pupils. And this answer was very important because, in fact, in this school, teachers were happy. So we spent 1 week together with them, and during this whole week, I saw only faces with smiles, with the same type of pupils who, in another school, are causing teachers permanent anxiety and fear. And while we were there, we saw teachers coming from other schools. A group of teachers arrived, led by their principal, because they wanted to learn from the school. And what I saw when I was observing these teachers coming from another school was not really commitment. No, I saw other types of emotions, which also could be drivers. I saw, first of all, anxiety. So these were teachers who came from schools where they were not capable to cope with the situation. They were, in fact, afraid of their students. And the second thing I saw was hopelessness. So they were hopeless because they didn't have the capacity. They didn't have the technology, I would say, to solve the problem. So these teachers were hopeless. And I also saw something what I could describe as envy. They were envious when they saw their colleagues in a school working in a very similar environment, and when they saw that they were smiling, that they were happy, they were envious. So the drivers which could push these teachers to try to replicate, to imitate, is not really commitment, but very different emotions. So I think that those drivers that we can find in teachers to go towards what this school I visited is doing can be very, very diverse. So not only what we really call basic commitment can drive them. And still, they may go to the same direction.
Yes, I have to be careful of the time, so we have a short time for brief interventions. Sorry.
No, that's okay. In Brazil, there are a lot of people who are saying what teachers can do or what teachers have to do outside of the school. So few people are interested in listening to the teachers themselves and their answers to this question. And the teachers' working conditions in Brazil are really bad right now and getting worse and worse. The salaries are really low and getting lower and lower. So right now, for example, we have lack of teachers in many public schools in Brazil. I mean, the poor is the community, and so the poor is the public school in that community. So you get a situation where you can see a lack of school teachers. And so, for example, we have now in Brazil a specific situation where children, they have to rotate their teachers. They have to share the teachers. So in some cases, the children, instead of going to the school 5 days a week, now they have to go 2 days a week because they have to share the teacher because there is no teacher for everybody, you know. Because again, the working conditions are getting, you know, worse and worse. And so, I mean, it's really hard to say what teachers can do in this specific situation. Specifically, if you work at university as a researcher or a teacher educator, you know, and being completely distant from the reality of the schools, producing discourses about the schools, producing discourses about the teachers' work, you know, even very progressive discourses like social justice teaching, you know. So this is a way to get the situation even worse.
I think it would be great if we could all be happy teachers, and that would be wonderful. But I tend to agree with you. In the favelas in Brazil or in inner city areas in the United States, that's very difficult. Your students come in, their brother's been shot, their family has been arrested. One of the best schools that I've visited in the last 30 years I've been in the U.S. is a school called Dr. Pedro Bizucampos Puerto Rican High School in Westtown, Chicago. In the mid-'80s, I was invited to go and spend time in this school. And I had never heard of it. And I just arrived at the United States, and I got a call from the principal, Marvin Garcia. He said, "Peter, we have just won the award for the best alternative school in the United States. And we'd like you to come and spend some time with us and give some talks and come and participate in our graduation." I said, "I'd love to do that, but I don't know much about your school." They said, well, we can't afford to give you a hotel, but we can give you a economy airfare, and you can come and spend a week with us. But you know what? I said, congratulations on your award. And they said, yeah, well, we were supposed to pick up the award at the White House in a ceremony, but instead we were visited with 60 FBI agents with sawed-off shotguns. They came into our school, they smashed it up and caused over $40,000 worth of damage, saying that the school was a school for terrorists. Why? Because some of the parents of the students were part of a Puerto Rican political group who were serving life sentences, or in some cases double life sentences in prison. There were political prisoners in the United States. And so it was unbelievable. This was an incredible school, but it was under assault. And I found time and time again schools that are talking about critical pedagogy, not just talking about them, but practicing critical pedagogy, trying to create a critical consciousness in the community with parent groups, with the teachers, with the students, have come under heavy fire by the forces of the state. Every single school that I would identify as a progressive, critical school working for change, working for social change, has come under some kind of assault by the state. Usually, first of all, by talk media, right? By radio personalities who hear about the school, and then they tend to demonize the school, and then the school gets a visit from the state. And that's very unfortunate. And in cases like that, it's very hard to be happy.
Thank you. We are running out of our time, but I really would like to give the audience, give the floor to the audience too, not for questions, if it's possible to ask you, just for some comments. You might have some comments after our views, another view you would like to add something. So in that case, I would be happy to hear some very brief interventions from the audience. Anyone who would like to contribute?
Thank you for the comment. It was really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And I was just wondering, because the two Hungarian examples mentioned are in very different places. One is in the northeast of the country, a really remote village, and the other one is in Budapest, not especially in the center, but neither it is very far away. And it was mentioned that really what made these schools, and I guess the other similar ones, successful were on one side the commitment of the teachers in the school, and the other side distributed leadership. So the leadership, or how it was functioning in the schools. And I was just really wondering what made that leaders and teachers specials, and how it was connected to their teacher trainings, because when I visited the schools, both schools, I got rather the impression that it was the school itself that socialized the teachers when they entered the schools, or in the one case, it was a transformation inside the school during long years. So it raised a lot of questions for me how teacher training can influence, and whether it can have a bigger, or, well, how significant the influence can be compared to the school socialization impact.
Thank you. That's a very interesting and provocative question too. Sorry, we are now gathering comments. We don't have time for answers. Really, we will see. Maybe in the end, at the end, if we have time. Any other comments or questions from the audience? If not, you can add something. You can answer.
I just want 2 sentences. It's always a committed school leader who is the force, the driving force of those things. I can give you an example. I will not say which school it is, where They had excellent results with distributed leadership, real democracy, and the change of the school had destroyed it in 3 months completely. So it depends on one person, always.
Yes, Angie?
Just first of all, and I think it's I agree with the idea about it's not fair to only blame teacher or it's just depending on teacher. Since teacher are, for me, teachers are also kind of oppressed, the oppressed group. And also talking about top and down, it's also, when you talk about top down or down top, is already talking about the imbalance of the power. So like a good entrepreneurs or good corporations, they're doing charity all over the world, and but the gap between top and down is getting bigger and bigger. So it's not same working. And also talking about the driver, is a good driver or bad driver? So driver could be good or could be bad. When it good, it function good. When it bad, it could very bad. Sorry, very bad. And is also related to power differences. And who is so? I think my point is just also I just am not comfortable with top and down, down and top that relationship. And since they are just kind of related to depend on each other, it's impossible to say get rid of down. Since then, no power. Since then, top cannot be top anymore. Am I clear? So it's a driver who is the top, who is down. Not say who is organizing things, who has who is down. Who I think it's more like if you represent student, so you are one of the students. If you're not represent student, then you are top. If you represent student, you are not top. You're one of them. You're not top. That's what I mean. So driver is kind of the same level. It's not a different level. Okay.
Thank you.
I hope I made it clear.
Thank you. I think it's important as to highlight this power issue here too. Julio, maybe the last comment.
Well, this driver issue, one of the lessons of the landless workers movement in terms of leadership is not to think about leaders and people being led by leaders, but people are able to be leaders and to be in a position of leadership. So the idea of taking turns, okay? So I can be a leader now, and I'm gonna learn to be a leader, leading. This is not natural. I can learn how to be a leader, and I'm gonna have a chance to be a leader in one specific moment. But so other people come to my position, and they also lead, and they learn how to be leaders. So in the landless workers movement, you know, one of the lessons is we have to go beyond this idea of leaders and followers, drivers and people who have been driven by drivers. And so the idea that everybody can take a leadership position.
Thank you. The discussion should be closed here, but I would like to return the point that Bogi has been asked, because I think that wasn't about leadership and school, it was about teacher education, if I understood well. If the school has, how much is important the school where teachers are socializing, and how much teacher education is important. And I think that is a very important question for us teacher educators or people interested in teacher education. And I think this discussion have contributed a lot, even for me personally, to have these different perspectives, and I think it contributed a lot to the questions of the conference. So thank you so much for your contributions.